All right. Hi. Good to be here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for Space 48 and Gareth and Robin, everybody, for this beautiful event. So yeah, let's get started. I'm talking about Mage-OS, and so far I've just given business presentations about it. And that's not really my thing, not really. So I wanted to do a technical talk, so welcome. Thanks. So for those of you who don't know what Mage-OS is, just, maybe you're living under a rock or something, I don't know. No, anyway, so it's a fork of Magento Open Source. No, honestly, maybe you haven't heard about it, I don't know. Its goal is to be to guarantee the longevity and success and growth of the Magento platform as we know and love it, as an alternative to relying on vendor-specific SaaS services, right? That's putting it in a neutral way. We are not anti-Adobe at all. If I were working with Adobe, I would be doing exactly what they are doing, but I'm not. So we're building Mage-OS. This is really aimed to be a completely independent, grown-up system, right? Despite me being in front of here, because I'm currently the president. A fancy name. All right. So this is not just me, though, right? It's a really team effort. I couldn't do this on my own. There are so many amazing people involved with it, and many of them are in this room, too, and there are many more all over the globe. One of them, by the way, is this cool dude here. And he's also on our board, so happy birthday. Please do not sing again. All right. No! I'm sorry, Peter, I really didn't mean to the yab, I didn't mean this to happen. Happy birthday to you. All right, let's move on. All right, so what I'm going to talk about for real now is how are Mage-OS packages built. Yeah, right, super interesting. Well, let's have a look. Maybe I actually found out it's not that bad at all. Right. So as you might or might not know, Magento is inside of a monorepo. So it's one repository on GitHub, Magento/Magento2. And why am I standing here? I've got this. All right, that's better. So yeah, it's one big repository. And it contains many modules, but when we install it, it actually comes as a bunch of separate composer packages, hundreds and hundreds of them, actually. So when we started, our idea was, OK, what do we have to do if we want to become independent? We want to do it ourselves, right? We want to take Magento and make it our own, because it's open source. That's what you do with open source. You own it. OK. So we thought we'd take this repository, and we'll just have to split it up and make packages out of it somehow. And there are many other projects that do something similar. Symfony, for example, Fabian wrote Splitch Lite, and there are other tools too. You can Google them, monorepo splitters or monorepo build tools and such. And we thought we'd probably just be able to use one of those, and that would be fine. So first experiments were encouraging. The first time Raphael Kastner actually did this, so shout out to Raphael. He did this just when we were still figuring out we had to do Mage-OS. He started already realizing we have to be independent and started building this. The first run, splitting the Magento repo, it's huge and it's got a huge history. It took 36 hours. So just imagine fixing a bug, having to wait for 2 days until you can see whether it worked or not. So nope, won't do that. So we needed something custom. Our plan was pretty simple, right? We clone the repo, and then we list all the tags in there and look for all the tags that look like a stable version from Composer. And for each of these tags, we'll check it out, iterate over all the folders in app code Magento, and each of those folders, each module has its own Composer JSON in there. So all we'll need to do is we'll look into the Composer JSON, take the name out of it and the version, and zip it up. Dump all the zip files into a folder, and then we can use Satis to generate the Composer repository out of it. Right? So that's where we started. And then Ivan said, hey, you know what? I want to build this in Rust. And it's going to be so fast, we don't have to even have to have a working copy. We'll keep the whole Git repository in memory, the whole database, and it'll be multi-threaded, and it's going to be amazing. So he started this repo splitter, and it won't just be for Magento, it'll be for everything. And that's awesome. But now I want something simple too. I'll build a bash script to do it, because the more versions we have, the more implementations by the more people, the better the problem will be understood, and the more people can participate, right? It'll become better. And yeah, so different people started building different implementations of this. And that was great. And one of these actually made it to production. It's the JavaScript implementation of all things. It's a Node script which started as an experiment. Just let's see how we can do that, because JavaScript also supports, there's a vanilla JavaScript implementation, well, Node, that also implements Git in JavaScript. It keeps everything in memory. So I thought, I'll take Ivan's idea and just do it in JavaScript, because I don't know Rust. And it kind of worked. But it's so slow. So we changed that to just shell out to Git, using exec to run Git command, and it's order of magnitudes faster that way. So anyway, the whole thing is also available as a Docker image. You can get it from Mage-CE, Mage-OS repo.js. So you can use it to build your own repo too, your own Composer repo, built yourself. It's the organization name there is Mage-CE, not Mage-OS, because Mage-OS already was taken. So no, we'll use just CE for Community Edition, right? For the good old days. All right. So now let's have a quick look at how that actually looks, because besides the packages and app code Magento and the framework, there's a bit more glue stuff, meta packages and so in Composer, the package manager, meta packages are packages that just have a Composer JSON. So they don't have any actual code. They just pull in other packages. They don't actually end up in the file system at all. So they just get resolved, and then the actual dependencies get pulled in later on. So the first thing that you actually install when you create Composer, create project, you type Magento Project Community Edition, that's a meta package. But it's teeny. It just depends on Magento Product Community Edition for the given version. And the Product Community Edition then has a big list of dependencies, namely all and every dependent package that makes up Magento in that version, right? And it's all for one specific version. So the constraints there aren't for like any patch level can increment. No, it's always for a very specific version. And the second meta package, besides the actual packages for the modules, also depends on the base package. Magento 2 base. And that's an interesting one, because in this package we find the app code Magento folder, but in that package it's empty. We also have dev tests and such, dev util, we have generated code. So basically the basic structure of folders and files we find in the root of a Magento project. Right? And this package, the base package, depends on Magento Composer Installer, which is a hackathon project that started, I don't know, 8 years ago or something for Magento 1. So it's still around. It's amazing. So what this thing does is, this Composer Installer, it looks at the Composer JSON of packages that get installed, and if there's an extra map in there, this extra map can list files and folders, and they will be copied out of the packet, out of the module inventor into the root directory. And that's how Magento copies all these folders that we can see, like bin Magento and so on, out of the base package into the project root. That's the base package. All right. So why I'm talking about this is we want to automate that stuff, right? We want to figure out how can we write this extra map programmatically. It turns out we can't for past releases. There's no way. Like I looked at all the different releases so far and compared what files do I have in the base package and in the file system, and what's being, it changes from release to release a little bit, and sometimes stuff gets added and the next release it gets removed again and so on. It's kind of weird, but there's no way to figure that out programmatically. So seems like it's a manual list that is probably maintained somewhere in Adobe or Magento, right? So At this point in time, what we're trying to do is we just want to replicate what Magento has done so far. So just by taking the Git repository, we want to be able to recreate the releases that Magento built in the past. So our solution there was simple, right? We just copied over all the composer.json files from past releases into our build script. And I mean, yeah, okay, you got to do what you got to do, but if we can't determine it programmatically, we'll just have to use it as a kind of database. So not nice, but yeah, it works. All right. And that wasn't all. So after solving this issue, there's more problems. Sometimes the version that's depended on in the base package isn't really what's in the composer.json in the tag release for that package. Sometimes the package doesn't have a version. Sometimes the code in a file in a tagged version is different from what's actually in the package that Magento distributes. Sometimes there's all these small little inconsistencies. Sometimes a file is missing even. It's just a MFTF file, but it's not there. So whoa, where does it come from? So the code that actually gets deployed into repo.magento.com isn't really what's on GitHub. It's very, very, very close, but it's not the same. So there must be a different source somewhere, obviously, their internal repo. So to recreate these things, we basically had to work through each of the issues, and each one had its own little solution. Maybe sometimes copying a file that wasn't there into our build script, sometimes adding new tags, or using different versions than actually in the composer.json, and so on. So we added workaround to workaround to workaround. And we didn't do that for all versions of Magento in the past. At one point, we just said, OK, 2.3.7p2 is the last one we'll support. All the older ones, nah. I mean, we could do that, but why? Right? It's not worth the effort, because every single version has its own little inconsistencies. And then, finally, one day, it worked. All done. Right? So it installed, and it ran. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. Next day, I wanted to start working with it, but hey, Ben's there. Hey, wonderful. The next day, I figured, OK, fresh new, the first Mage-OS install. But why isn't there two-factor authentication in the admin? It's like, I mean, it's good, but why? Normally, it's always there. That's the first thing I do. I ran into, oh, damn. So, that's odd. Turns out there are more repos. It's not just the Magento 2 repo. There are actually a dozen or so more. So these needed to be added to the build script too. We needed to go over all of these. And there are many different types of repositories. Some are like one repo with just a single package in it. Some are a bunch of packages in the root folder with a meta package and an _ meta package subdirectory. Sometimes we have special cases. Like in the Magento repo, we have the lib internal Magento framework, right? That's one package. But then inside of there, we have some folders that, again, are their own packages, like the AMQP and stuff, right? That's all its own package. So we have, again, a lot of different kind of rules we basically had to encode how this stuff is built. And yeah, then all these external packages are added as dependencies to the product package, to the Magento product community edition package, right? And then that pulls those in, and finally we get the whole picture with all the other stuff in there. Core bundled extensions. So our favorites, all these things. So our first idea when we started wanting to build Mage-OS was, let's get rid of them. Like, why do we even want these things anymore? There were probably good reasons to add them into Magento. Money, right? What else? But, well, we're not getting that money, so why add them? That said, we still wanted to recreate the past releases. So for the past release, at least, let's do that. Turns out these packages are actually forks. Like all these modules, you can find them on GitHub, maintained by Amazon and PayPal and so on. But the packages that get distributed with the older Magento releases, they're not the packages from GitHub. Magento forked all these repos and then started building and maintaining their own version of it. So whenever there's a new release there, that's a patch that Magento applies to their version of that code. And these forks are not public. They're nowhere to be found. So what do? the usual answer, right? We just took all past versions of the core bundle extensions, the finished packages. We just copied them from repo.magento.com. Thankfully, the licenses allow us to do that, and just we bundle them into our old Mirror releases. Because we don't have the repos, we can't rebuild them. Yeah, and then finally, everything seemed to be OK. Now, this is where I want to give a big shout out to Daniel. Where's Daniel? Daniel Slope. There he is. That's the man. He did amazing work in regards to quality assurance. So what basically happens is, every time we do a build, he wrote a GitHub action that installs our freshly minted build from Mage-OS.org, right? And then the same version is installed from repo.magento.com. And then this action compares all the installed versions and all the files and folders, and if there are any differences between the original and our version, our packages that we built, then the build fails, right? Then we know about it. So that's why we know, yeah, this actually works. So thank you. Super cool. I rely on it so much. And now we finally have installable versions of everything, all the past versions since 2.3.7p2. So that's awesome. And we can say, indeed, it doesn't matter whether you use Magento Open Source from repo.magento.com or these, both work. Same, with high confidence. So next step, nightly builds. What does that mean? So basically, we want to take the development version of each of those dozen repositories and take the head of the current develop branch and build a release from there. And this means we need to figure out how to do that if we don't have a tag and versions in there. So instead of using the version tag like 246, we'll just use the head. And then we'll have to figure out which version to give the packages, right? Because they all have to be versions, so they can be pulled in by the meta packages, etc. So that's actually not that easy. In the end, what we settled in was we used the previous released version of the package. And if it's less than 4 parts, like 1.2.3.4, if it's just 1.2.3, then we use the 4th internal version number that Composer can manage and just add a 4th version there. If there is a 4 version parts already, we'll just increment the last one, and then we'll add a -alpha suffix with a build tag with the current date, right? So this kind of gives us a tag that works, and if there already is a stability flag, like beta or patch level or something, we'll just keep that and add the build tag into it. So it works, right? So there is no perfect answer here. It's kind of, yeah, because there's no way we could programmatically figure out if we need to increment the patch level or the minor or the major version. We don't want to analyze the code statically there, right? Not for nightly builds. And sometimes the nightly builds are broken. That happens if somebody pushes broken commits into the branch, and sometimes they work. But that's what nightly builds are for. Another thing we had to deal with is how to, what does the base package actually depend upon? The base package defines the extra map, but it also contains code, like bin Magento and the setup directory, all the test frameworks and such. So what we ended up doing is we wrote a little script that iterates over all PHTML and PHP files, and for every reference of a PHP class in there, we use Composer to figure out which package contains it, and then we just record that version of that package that's installed there as a dependency for the base package. So at least the require section we can generate. While doing that, we figured out the upstream Magento Open Source contains many dependencies that aren't actually needed anymore. Maybe they were in the past. And some are missing, right? They just get pulled in otherwise. So it kind of rocks doing that stuff automatically. It's much better than maintaining it manually. And that means we have nightly releases. This is as close as something to a beta release that we will ever get for Magento Open Source. So any extension developer can already always automate their CI pipeline against the current build. So this is the first time we actually created something that wasn't there before, right? The mirrors, we already had those releases, but this is something new. Good first step. The next step was doing the same for our fork. So we have nightly builds of our fork of Magento Open Source. And that's just the same as the nightly builds for upstream. So that just worked. that was pretty nice. What now needs to happen when upstream creates a new release? So when Magento or Adobe makes a new release? Well, first of all, we need to take those parts that we can't generate, like the base package composer JSON sets, we have to copy them over. Then we run the build, and then we validate the new version with what Daniel had, and then we'll have to fix the stuff that isn't right, work around the issues, add a bit of work config there, and yeah, just go along until we finally have a build that works, and then we deploy that to mirror magento.org. So we can get that done probably within a day usually. If there's like a missing tag, the people from Adobe actually are quite helpful. If we open an issue, it maybe takes them a week or so to add the tag, and then we no longer require that specific workaround, for example. And they are improving their build process. So I think there's already a feedback loop that when we use their stuff, they can get to improve their tooling on the other hand. So it's kind of nice. That's what I like happening here, right? So we can profit from each other, at least a little bit. Good. All this is encoded in GitHub Action. Again, Daniel did a lot of work there. Damien Retzinger also did a lot of work, and many others. So yeah, this is not all manual. Normally, it's somewhat just a matter of just running the GitHub Actions until it's green finally. All right. So what's the time? Minus 3 minutes. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, my laptop's over there. So, okay, maybe we do the meta version of it after all. I was hoping to maybe just open up and look at stuff, but since my computer isn't here either, it's kind of tricky. So anyway, what we now have, the build, how it works is we've got a file, the build config, right? And there we have an array of, well, technically it's a map, I guess. So anyway, each repository is a JavaScript JSON object in there, and it has a URL. And it can define the structure that's used inside of that repository, right, that needs to be built. Is it an individual package? Does it contain a subdirectory with many? Does stuff need to be excluded? Do we need to add specific tags? All the stuff we just added to the config. That's basically how we can define the workarounds that are required for a given release. And then we just run the script on it, and it takes all that information, checks out the repos, does everything, patches it, whatever. And yeah, that's how it gets built. Oh yeah, everything goes into that still stayed the same from the beginning, right? We put it, all these zip files that we then generate, we jump into a directory, and then we run Satis on it, and we have a composer repository. So that's actually still there. Satis is awesome. Okay, so finally, the reason why I decided to talk about this build process is it would be awesome to have more help building this. So we're this close. The final step is we need to create our own Mage-OS releases. This will finally make us independent. This is like the last step in this whole process that we went through over the last year of building all this stuff. This will allow us to actually make improvements and make changes. There are projects we are working on currently. For example, Adam here, there he is, together with Damien, they're working on a much faster feedback loop for running integration tests, running unit tests, all that stuff, right, through NX. We're working on new features already. The first new feature will be a webhook async module. That's part of it, which Gori added it. Ivan is also working on a new feature for improving the indexer stuff. So these are very low-level improvements that still remain backward compatible, but being able to more easily create integrations with third-party services, right? That's what the async tool is for. More easily use the message queuing system in there and have decent visibility in the back end. That's super useful, right? Doing the integrations is maybe half the work usually of any Magento project. So I'm excited about it. Right. So anybody who's interested, we meet every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Central Europe time. Feel free to drop by. There's a Discord server that's where all the communication goes over. And yeah, that's probably the best place to start. Once we have this independent builds, then we can start working more on Magento itself, making it better. You know, building the features that we want into it, and taking it into the future. All right, so there's already a lot of people who contributed. Many of them here. There actually are a lot more. This isn't current anymore. So from all around the world, people are working on this. It's pretty awesome to see. Yeah, come join us. It's really good. And I'm looking forward to working with it there. So yeah, questions, maybe?